acid equals inflammation, but inflammation can disrupt the acid environment. And that's kind of the nuance that most people aren't thinking about. If we're overstressed, we're eating on the run, we're shoving food down, we're in a hurry, we're not going to have good digestion. Hey guys, welcome back to another Rest, Eat, Move podcast. We're going to continue this digestive series. And so if you haven't listened to the podcast 270 right before this on mastication and chewing and how that's important for digestion, I recommend listening to that one first. This one will make a little more sense. But again, as always, it's meant to listen to on its own as well. And so we're going to continue this path of digestive health, talking about some of the nuances of digestion and elimination and absorption that aren't talked about, I think, as much as they need to. And today is a topic that might seem opposite of what you hear us say all the time, that most people think they have too much acid, but the truth is they don't have enough. And so today we're going to talk about the stomach. And so last podcast we talked about chewing in the mouth. I'm not going to get too much into the esophagus, swallowing, but we're going to stop at the stomach. Obviously, part of the digestion is the small intestines and the large intestines and the colon and elimination. But we're going to stop at the stomach. And the stomach requires acid. Now, it's a little bit different than alkaline diet versus acidic diet. By eating an acidic diet, by no means correlates to better stomach acid. You want your stomach acid to be about 1.5 to 3 on a pH scale. And we need this because the stomach is where we break down food, specifically protein. So for many people, poor digestion might be not enough acid. I'll explain why an alkaline diet actually can lead to better acid production in the stomach. It's kind of one of those weird things that twist your brain around, but most digestive issues are blamed on being acidic, like we've talked about. But sometimes people think about acid in the stomach as the blame. We actually need that acid, hyperchloride, to produce better digestion. So why do we need stomach acid? Number one, it breaks down protein. And so it breaks it down into usable amino acids, and that stomach is the only thing that breaks down the protein. Now, we chew protein, but to really break it down, because protein is a pretty large molecule, we need pepsin, which is a digestive enzyme that's made in the stomach. It kills pathogens, so that acidic environment kills these pathogens. That's a good thing. So bad bacteria, parasites, viruses, before they hit the gut. Helps absorb minerals like iron and calcium and zinc and magnesium. It signals the pancreas and gallbladder to release enzymes and bile. Now, one caveat is we see an epidemic issue of gallbladder issues and an epidemic of removing the gallbladder, and they're correlated. So putting a lot of pressure on that gallbladder and pancreas because that acid environment in the stomach is out of balance can be a problem. So why do so many people have low acid stomachs? Well, this is the big one. Now, stress equals acid environment, but when it comes to the stomach, so when I talk about alkalinity, pH, we're talking about the byproduct of it. But specifically in the stomach, chronic stress activates your fight or flight response, which suppresses digestive function. Now think about that. You're in a fight or flight situation. You want that digestion to shut down. You don't want stomach acid to be producing. You don't want a stomach ache. You don't want to feel full. You don't want to think about food. You want to fight or flight. When you're in chronic stress, you suppress the digestive function and your body isn't prioritizing good digestion. And so that's the big one that we're going to talk about today, is chronic stress leads to low stomach acid production. Number two, aging. The stomach acid naturally declines as we age. That's why people don't eat as much. That's why they, struggle with digestion a little bit more. But to me, that's one thing that just happens. Aging happens, not something that we can necessarily control. The second big one and the third piece here is something we can control, and these are your antacids or your proton pump inhibitors, or think about Tums or Prilosec or Nexium. These are your antacids. Antacids long-term are going to lead to low acid production in the stomach. So it shuts this acid production down. That's what their job is to do. But long-term, that means that we're going to have poor digestion. And so this is going to lead to poor absorption. This is going to lead to leaching out minerals. We talked about leaching out zinc in past podcasts and how that leads to poor hormones and sex hormones and many different issues. And so antacids can be that Band-Aid, but it also can be that Band-Aid that covers up the source of the problem. Poor chewing or fast eating. So podcast number 1 was on mastication and the importance of chewing. We're not chewing our food. We're eating a lot of processed foods. We're trying to drink a lot of our beverages. Chewing, fast eating, this is going to lead to poor stomach acid. Low salt intake. So salt or chloride is what's needed, the foundational pillar to produce hydrochloric acid. So we need that foundation. So too little salt means too little acid. Well, I've heard I need to eat a low salt diet. Well, we're going to talk about sea salt versus table salt. There is a difference. Processed, low nutrient foods, this is going to lead to, again, poor stomach acid. Whole foods stimulate digestion, processed ones don't. Enzymes, poor digestion lead to enzyme and acid burnout. So this is important. When you're not consuming enough food with enzymes, you're going to have this acid burnout because it's working too hard. And then infections and inflammation. So inflammation leads to all disease and illness. H. pylori and some of these different potential infections can reduce the acid environment because there's an infection, there's something going on. So gut inflammation really disrupts that acid-alkaline balance. So what are we paying attention to? Well, do you feel bloated after you're eating? Do you feel that kind of that gas, reflux or heartburn, undigested food, iron, B12 deficiency, magnesium deficiency? Maybe you're feeling restless or anxious, feeling overly full, especially after eating maybe protein, burping, gas, nausea. These are some of the signs that you have too low stomach acid. So how are we going to really improve this? Again, here's the key. Your stomach breaks down protein. And so when we need this acid environment, it's to break down specifically these amino acids. It kills these pathogens, and then it creates this enzyme called pepsin, which helps to kind of chop up protein, like protein scissors. So acid equals inflammation, but inflammation can disrupt the acid environment. And that's kind of the nuance that most people aren't thinking about. And so when I'm consuming a lot of food that's creating a lot of inflammation, maybe I'm eating too much dairy, or maybe I'm eating too much processed foods, dyes, dough conditioners, this creates this inflammation that disrupts that stomach lining or that acid environment. We need minerals for stomach acid. So we're not eating whole foods. We don't get enough minerals. Next thing you know, we don't have the raw material to produce that hydrochloric acid. Lemon water, this is one of the greatest things that I believe can help with digestion. This is really good for helping to produce that better acid environment, better alkalinity, pH balance, and then stress shuts down stomach acid. To me, that's the biggest takeaway of this podcast. If we're overstressed, we're eating on the run, we're shoving food down, we're in a hurry, we're not going to have good digestion. And so here's a couple of the takeaways. Before I get into the takeaways, so I'm going to get into 5 takeaways. One of the things, and I always like to point out my weaknesses, one of the things that I have a weakness is I love food. I love snacking. I love tasting different things. And so when you're eating constantly throughout the day, think about this as like the pedal to the metal, the gas is to the floor. That's putting a lot of pressure on your stomach. So if I'm just constantly eating throughout the day, it doesn't even have to be bad food. That stomach acid is going to get out of balance because it's the gas is to the floor. So there's going to be a burnout. So skipping meals isn't a good idea. Grazing all day isn't a good idea. We want to create this little bit of balance where there's an ebb and flow for consuming food, digesting food, giving it a break, and then doing it again. Because food gives us nutrients, which gives us energy, but consuming it all day, that gas is to the floor. So here's the 5 takeaways. Number 1, I think sea salt is a number 1 requirement when you're upgrading your pantry, you're improving the food in your home. We talk about this from an alkalinity. It's very alkalizing. It's different than table salt. So table salt, 2 minerals, Celtic sea salt or pink Himalayan sea salt, somewhere around 80 minerals, extremely alkaline. But you need this sodium, the salt, to produce hydrochloric acid. So upgrading to sea salt in the home is a great option. I'm not a fan of people trying to say, I'm trying to cut out salt. What they're trying to say is they're trying to consume less processed food that contains that processed sodium. In the home, when you're using salt, go to sea salt. Number 2, lemon in your water. One of the best things you can do for digestion, acid reflux, inflammation is to put lemon in your water. Lemons are acid by kind of in the environment, but by digestion, they help to alkalize, but specifically in that process, help to make the stomach acid actually produce. Now, what you'll find is, as I talk about the mouth and the esophagus and the stomach and the small intestines, each of those processes, the duodenum, its job is to kind of control the pH. And so in the mouth, you really want to be in the more alkaline side of the equation. As it goes through the esophagus, it starts to transform as then you get into the stomach and what needs to be more acidic. But it's a balance. Number 3, rest and digest. Stress shuts down your stomach acid. And so we want to be in this calm, more patient state when we're eating our food because it puts us into that rest and digest, which starts to stimulate the stomach to do its job. Again, stress shuts it down. I think number 4 is something that's a nuance. It's these bitter foods. Again, I can take digestive enzymes and supplements to improve digestion, but I think some of the key foods that really we have available is raw ginger, turmeric, arugula, kale. These are some of the bitter foods that help to produce or stimulate this production. That might be something you try. If I ever have stomach issues and I really want to go at it from a naturopathic stance, ginger is one of my first go-tos. I think everyone in Michigan, where we're from, has heard of Vernors when you're sick, even though there's no longer ginger in the Vernors. But that was the idea, is the ginger helped to calm the stomach. Ginger is, to me, one of the powerful foods for digestion. And then number 5, which leads back to our first podcast on digestion, is we have to chew our food. And so these are the 5 things that really help to make sure that you're making that stomach acid. Again, it's not that, for most people, it's not that it's too high, that it's too low, but coincidentally, eating an acid food environment, for the most part, leads to the stomach not doing what it's meant to do. And as we go down this path, and I'm talking about the stomach and the intestines and large intestines and digestion, the duodenum, absorption, elimination, one of the things we can't forget, I'm going to talk about this more, is your nervous system runs the show. If you're stressed, if you have this chronic fight or flight, you're going to have poor digestion. It might show up in the esophagus. It might show up in your bowel movements. It might show up with bloating or gas or inflammation. Maybe it's showing up with anxiety. Your nervous system runs the show. When you're too full, you don't feel well mentally. When you don't feel well mentally, you don't feel well from a digestive standpoint. I've talked about the enteric nervous system. This is the nervous system that's in your gut. And so the gut is the second brain. It communicates to the brain and vice versa. We'll keep talking about this, but don't forget the nervous system runs the show. But as we wrap this up, remember, most people think they have too much acid, and most people do eat an acidic food lifestyle. They have an acidic lifestyle from too much stress, lack of sleep. But when it comes to the stomach, for many people, it's not that they have too much acid. It's that they don't have enough. And some of these healthy lifestyle choices that we've talked about, this is how we can get the digestion working with us versus against us. And again, we're going to keep going down this path. Digestion, to me, is the key for proper nutrition. If we don't have good digestion, we don't have good absorption. If we don't have good absorption, we don't have good elimination, and it goes hand in hand. And so we'll continue down this path. But I think one of the takeaways is that if we don't really think about and take the time to properly consume our food, we're going to show up with some of these issues. Stress shuts down stomach acid, and to me, that's a big one because the nervous system runs the show. We'll see you again next time.